Hey everybody, this is Blake here, and welcome to my review of Prisoners. Now, when I first saw the trailer for Prisoners, I thought it looked really good, but in a critic catering kind of way. I'm very wary of movies that seem like they're aimed for a more highbrow crowd. I know that's going to piss some people off, but it's just how I feel, which is strange because when I actually sit down and watch them, I generally like them more than not. But it's like I really try to avoid watching these kinds of movies in the theaters. I'd much rather wait until they get released on Netflix. Maybe it's because theaters really heighten my expectations, and for a lot of these kinds of movies, they have a lot of Oscar buzz surrounding them, so my expectations are more than likely not to be met. Whereas when I watch something on DVD, I don't know, my expectations are much more mellow for some reason. Um, for example, a recent one was Zero Dark 30, and of course that made a big splash among critics, and I think did pretty well financially too. But I did not want to watch that movie in the theaters. I instead waited until it came out on DVD, and you know what? I thought that movie was pretty overrated. Good, but overrated. I didn't really see anything about it that warranted the Oscar nomination. Um, so with Prisoners, of course, the critics loved it. I did have high expectations, but really the only reason I chose to watch it in the theaters was nothing else was coming out that interested me. And I usually see something every week, although probably not next week. Rush looks just so bland to me, and that Don John, I can't think of what it's called, the one with Joseph Gordon-Levitt, isn't really doing much for me either. And usually I see movies with my father, and he's going to be gone, so I'm probably not going to watch any of those until they come out on DVD too. Uh, but so I ended up watching Prisoners, and you know what? I really, really liked it. It's nice to see a movie that I feel met my expectations, even though it was definitely setting itself up for disappointment. Now, would I say it's a great film? Yeah, maybe. I do think it has some flaws, but I was surprised at how much I enjoyed myself. And one of the reasons I generally don't like films which cater to critic standards is usually it really feels like they're wallowing in their own filth. They know they're good, so they're going to have to play up those attributes to a way where I really begin to feel that they're very superficial. So that's the reason why I don't like Terrence Malick. I hated Tree of Life. When I watch that film, I don't see a whole lot good about it. I see a movie that thinks it's really good and that's trying its best to be really good, but there's something just so phony and unbelievable about it, just in the way it's presented. I know it's kind of an abstract movie anyway, but so I have no emotional attachment to the characters or whatever. Uh, and that's also one of the reasons I was very mixed on Cloud Atlas, another movie I saw recently. It has its positive attributes, but at the same time, it takes them so far to a way where it just seems like a movie that, once again, it's wallowing in its own filth. That it thinks it's hot shit. And there's something kind of alienating about that. But Prisoners, I thought, did a good job at taking, it's what critics like about movies. It's very leisurely paced. It's very much about the characters instead of the story and how they're reacting to this situation. So it's a movie that's very much driven by its performances. But it does a good job at taking that and making it kind of mainstream. So where it moves fairly well compared to most of its contemporaries. It is very suspenseful and edgy at times. I'll even admit, at times I thought it was even downright scary. But at the same time, though, it never takes that too far to where it becomes typical Hollywood. Throughout the majority of the film, I really wasn't sure where it was going to go. Would it have a happy ending? Would it be a total downer? I can see it going either way, and that of course is going to really magnify the suspense. It's always nice to watch a movie where you're not entirely sure where it's going to go. Although I did eventually figure out where it was going in terms of its final twist, long before it became obvious. But even then, I attribute that to me being incredibly good at solving mysteries in movies, and not so much that the movie itself just didn't have very good mystery. So let's go ahead and talk about, of course, the most important aspect of this film, the acting. It's amazing. I've always liked Hugh Jackman since he did X-Men, and I've always felt that he was a much better actor than I think a lot of people give him credit for. He's not just a standard action star where, these kinds of guys always kind of rely on, their physical presence, their charisma, and maybe comedic timing. He has definitely a lot more talents under his belt. I remember when I saw The Fountain for the first time, which is odd because you'd think I'd hate that movie, but I actually really liked it, and I was just blown away by how many emotions he could convey so naturally. And this film definitely kind of brings that back. He goes through all these different stages where he's allowed to really act to the best of his abilities, and he nails it. But also, he's been totally badass. But what's really impressive about that is he's not just Wolverine badass. He's the totally different kind of badass. He's more low key and subtle. You can definitely tell that this guy, if he really wanted, could probably beat you up. But once again, it's not action hero badass. It's just normal guy badass. So the fact that Hugh Jackman can do two different kinds of badasses, Wolverine type stuff, then prisoners type stuff. That's just amazing to me. I can't think of the last time I really seen an actor be able to pull that off. So he was awesome. I also thought Paul Dano did a really great job. He's the guy, because the whole premise is, these two families get together, they lose track of their kids who suddenly vanish, so they call the cops, and Jake Gyllenhaal's the one who's trying to get them back, and they think they have a suspect who's played by Paul Dano, but they can't hold him for long, so Hugh Jackman, the father of one of these families, decides to kidnap him, and plans on torturing him until he talks, because he's sure that this guy is the one who took the kids. But Paul Dano, what I really liked about him is he played kind of like this absent-minded person who's obviously kind of disturbed really effectively. Like when you see him, you definitely can tell that he's not there. Paul Dano is very believable at conveying that, but at the same time, there are moments where he does come across as kind of sinister, or maybe he's much smarter than he's really letting on, but it's not overplayed. So it's just kind of it's a very nuanced performance, and I thought he did spectacular. I also thought Terrence Howard did a really good job, although that's not as much of a surprise. What I like about Terrence Howard is that when I first was introduced to him as an actor, in terms of watching his movies, it seemed like his early roles, he was always playing these cold-blooded, hard-ass, often the villain. But like here, he's very vulnerable. He's definitely not as strong-willed as Hugh Jackman's character, but he's also much more, I don't know, he's more emotional. He realizes that what they're doing is wrong. And Terrence Howard once again a type of role you don't usually see him play as much, and I thought he also did really good. And everybody else I thought did fine too, or not just fine. I thought they were exceptional. Everybody, even the smaller characters had something of interest. And Jake Gyllenhaal, he's not going to stand out as much as Hugh Jackman or Paul Dano is, but he's much edgier than I usually see him. Although he's done this kind of role before, I totally believe him as kind of a rugged, cop on the edge, but at the same time, we're not talking dirty, hairy cop on the edge. And throughout the bulk of the movie, you could see how he's becoming more progressively exhausted as he becomes more emotionally attached to this case, which this is one of those few films where becoming more emotionally attached is not necessarily a good thing. So it leads to many different moral dilemmas where, people are going to make some serious mistakes, but they're mistakes you could see people actually making, and that just makes the whole experience that much more tragic. Now, the majority of the suspense is done through the actors, So, for example, when you see, Hugh Jackman kidnapping Paul Dano, you don't really know what Hugh Jackman's going to do, and that's really what makes it more suspenseful. Or when you see Paul Dano acting in totally creepy while he's walking his dog, that's just, once again, it's a very almost spooky scene just because the actor is doing such a good job. But there are moments where the director really does take the center stage, and I'll say the snake scene really did freak me out, and the part where Jake Gyllenhaal is driving near the end, that's also a very, very nerve-wracking sequence. So that was really good. And the violence in this movie it's very brutal and at times difficult to watch, especially when you see how badly they beat up Paul Dano, and how his face starts to swell up. that was really unsettling. And the fact that you're dealing with, child killers, that also in itself is a very unsettling premise. So, and I think the film did milk that very well to where it just made the whole experience that much more unsettling. So, my only complaint regarding Prisoners was I did feel it was too long. I was surprised when I found out that it was 2.5 hours long. Um, I guess it's a good thing that I didn't realize that. And it's not a slow-paced movie. It's not fast-paced either, but it's, like I said, leisurely paced. But I did feel that it ran out of steam before the ending came around. After the snake scene, you kind of feel that the film is going to wrap itself up, but it doesn't. It keeps going for what at least felt like another 30 minutes, and I will admit I was eventually getting kind of impatient. It's sort of like how Skyfall, the last James Bond movie, I thought it was, just perfect up until the final act. And even though I thought the final act in itself was really good, by that point I was just getting kind of tired of it and was wishing that it was going to end. Even though, like I said, the third act in itself was fine, and Prisoners is the exact same way. Uh, so that's really all I've got. Anything else I could say? Actually, I filled out this review much more efficiently than I thought I would. Uh, I did written reviews of, crap, I don't even remember, Solomon Kane, so read that. I don't even know what the next one is. The next one's going to be Dynamite Warrior, which is a Muay Thai action film, which probably will be released tomorrow. Um, I'll hopefully get on Critiquing the Critics this week if I'm feeling better. Okay, so back to Prisoners. I would recommend everybody watch it. I'd even say go ahead and watch it in the theaters. I thought it was that good. But if you can't watch in the theaters, whether it's a matter of time or money, at least give it a look when it comes out on DVD. So I guess since I said I'd talk about some other movies that I've seen recently, I'll go ahead and get into that really quickly. Zero Dark 30, as I said, I thought was overrated. It was good. It was a film that had a great cast, and they all were able to stand out despite not having a whole lot of screen time. And there are many effective moments, but as a whole, I felt it was kind of emotionally cold. I never really made an attachment to the main character, and I thought the finale, where they actually invade Osama bin Laden's compound, it's very uncomfortable, intentionally so. But at the same time, it was not very exciting. I was just kind of bored throughout the ending, which is weird because that was the one scene I was really looking forward to throughout the majority of the film. But it's good. I think it's worth watching, but I didn't feel it was, I didn't think it really deserved all its Oscar nominees. What else? Sorcerer, talk about a movie that wallows in its own filth. Sorcerer was a film I've been wanting to see for a while. It's a Roy Scheider film, and it's directed by the guy who did The Exorcist, and it's a remake of a film called Wages of Fear, which I have not seen. But I added it to my Netflix account like years ago, I think, and it's always been on a very long wait. Well, it finally became available, so I watched it, and I was kind of disappointed. I thought the first half was unreasonably slow. It took too long getting to the setup, and I kept thinking they could easily explain all of this, and they could have cut down the screen time by half. There's so many unnecessary shots, and I think it's just, like I said, unnecessarily slow paced. But once it gets into the actual story that are on the second half, then it becomes amazing. I loved its atmosphere. It's almost, I don't know, it's very surreal and weird, kind of like Apocalypse Now, where you see these characters kind of start breaking down mentally. It's very, very suspenseful. And even though it's still slow paced, it's the type of slow pace that really emphasizes atmosphere. So I can totally get into that. The bridge scene was amazing. Boy, did that get under my skin. That scene alone was worth watching the movie. So yeah, I'd recommend Sorcerer, especially if you're into more highbrow movies. But I'd say if you have like Netflix or something, it's worth adding to your Netflix list, but you have to be prepared to, you have to wait till it gets to the interesting stuff. Moonraker, a Bond film, has a reputation for being the worst of the Bond movies, although at least one of the worst. I disagree. I thought it was a lot of fun. It's definitely silly, maybe even stupid at times, but I thought it was one of the better paced Bond movies. Usually the Bond films are kind of awkwardly paced, even though I love many of them. But I thought this one never became boring or never ran out of steam. It was just entertaining from beginning to end, even if it was kind of stupid. So that's all I'll go ahead and talk about. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys later.